Okay, so the exercise we're going to talk about now is what's called a hinge pattern, or what a lot of people commonly refer to as a deadlift pattern. So the biggest difference here between this movement and a squat movement is how the knees move. So in a squat, when we squat, we're really thinking about trying to sit into a hole and letting our knees come forward and keeping our back as upright as possible and sitting down into a hole. With a hinge pattern, it's less forward knee movement and more of the hips moving backwards. So if we look at it from the side, a squat would look like the knees moving forward and me trying to sit down into a hole in between my legs, essentially. A hinge pattern looks more like this. There's slight forward knee movement, but nowhere near as much as the squat, and we're really focusing on, instead of knees going forward, hips getting pushed back. So you can see that my knees are soft, so we're not locking my knees in place. My knees are nice and soft, but instead of the knees tracking forward as much, I'm really focusing on pushing my hips back. My chest is going to come over. It will eventually get close to parallel with the ground. And then I'm going to use my butt and I'm going to use my hamstrings to push and stand back up. So this is a hinge pattern here instead of a squat pattern. So we're going to look at a couple different variations of the hinge pattern. One of the first things you can start with is get something behind you, like a wall, that you can reach to with your hips. So I'm going to use the rack here, but this could be a wall. Or just something stable that's behind you that you can reach your hips back to. So this is a great way to learn the movement. So I'm going to touch the back here. All right, so my tailbone is touching it. I'm going to take a couple steps away, and then my focus is going to be reach, touch. So now I've just touched it, stand back up, reach, touch. Keep the toes on the ground. You don't want your toes to come up off the ground, so keep those planted into the ground. Maybe even try and claw the ground a little bit with your toes. So reach and touch. Then after you feel comfortable with that, you step further away, reach and touch. Your knees can remain soft, but again, it's hips go back, not knees go forward, right? So the next thing that we can do to add a little bit more intensity is grab something like your backpack or a kettlebell. You can hold your backpack like this, and you can reach and come on up, right? Or you can try that with a kettlebell or even a dumbbell or a cooler, whatever piece of equipment you're most comfortable with, reach here. Now, when you get really comfortable with this movement, you can step away from the wall. You can still use your kettlebell or your backpack like this, or you can start setting things on the ground in between your feet. That's a little bit more challenging, requires more mobility. Reach. Let those hands go down. At this point, you can start squatting a little bit to get down to it. Stand up. Get those hips back. And that is your hinge deadlift pattern.